Welcome everyone, and thanks for participating in the Big Brothers Big Sisters virtual conference. We're delighted you've joined us for this training session today. I'm Tanya Gibson, Vice President of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Human Resources at Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, and we're excited to present Crisis as a Platform for Change, a conversation with Dr. Shelton Goode and President and CEO of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America, Pam Iorio. Dr. Shelton Goode is the President and Chief Executive Officer of Icarus Consulting. Icarus Consulting is a veteran-owned firm which helps companies build a diverse workforce and create an inclusive workplace. This is accomplished by partnering with clients to develop strategies to attract, develop, and retain highly skilled talent from an emerging diverse workforce, and at the same time enhance the engagement, knowledge, and skill of current employees. Dr. Goode has over 20 years of human resources and D&I experience, and he has held executive positions in several global companies. He has earned the reputation for being a strategic yet results-oriented leader whose expertise includes talent management, change management, and executive coaching. He has also taught at several colleges and universities and is currently an adjunct professor with Duke University's Corporate Education Department. Dr. Goode has published several books. His most recent book, Winter in America, The Impact of the 2016 Presidential Election on Diversity in Companies, Communities, and the Country, is on the Outskirts Press bestsellers list. Dr. Goode received his doctorate from the University of Alabama and his master's degree in human resources from Troy University. He serves on the board of several organizations and has won several awards. Dr. Goode currently resides in the Atlanta area. Before we turn it over to our speakers, we have just a little bit of housekeeping to go over today. All lines are muted, but you can ask questions by typing your question into the question box. We will address most questions at the end of today's session and hope to answer all of your questions during our time today. If not, we will follow up with you after the webinar. The webinar is being recorded, and you can access the recording later in the on-demand video library on the conference website. As a reminder, the virtual conference will end on June 26th with a celebration recognizing BBBS agencies, matches, and the National Bigs and Littles of the Year. Make sure to check out the conference website for more details on this event and the full list of trainings being offered during the virtual conference. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Shelton Goode and Pam Iorio.
Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to be with you today and to have a conversation with your great CEO, Pam. So consider this a conversation, a courageous conversation. We're going to model what that sounds like. So we're going to be transparent, authentic, and candid. Pam and I, we've only talked a couple of times, but I feel like I've known her for a long time. So let's just jump right in. And Tanya, thank you for that long introduction. I thought it was going to be longer than the session. I'll have to give you a shorter one next time. Pam, let's reciprocate. And I know you're the CEO, and everybody probably knows you, but let's not assume that. So, in the way of an introduction of yourself, how about reminding everybody who you are, and give us a sneak peek into who you are in terms of what sort of things do you like to do? Tell us something maybe is not on your bio and is not well known.
Okay, well, you know, if we're talking to folks in the network, they probably do know me, but just in case you don't, I've been the CEO for the past about 6.5, going on 6.5 years. It's truly been a complete honor and privilege of my life to be part of Big Brothers Big Sisters of America. I came in just to be a short timer and ended up being a long timer, I think, because the mission is so terribly attractive. I mean, you can't help but be just so drawn to what all of our agencies are doing, and you want to help them as much as you can because you want to see more kids being served. And so I would have to say that it's been a highlight. Okay, something about me that people would know. I don't know. I don't know. I'm just, you know.
Do you cook, like to travel?
Regular person.
Anything like that?
I really, I like to read. And I take long walks all the time, and I like to be around my family and friends. And I really cherish my family, and I cherish my friendships. I've had friendships that go back to elementary school, and I feel very fortunate in life to have very, very strong friendships. So, and a wonderful family. So I think that's not anything unusual. It's probably a lot of people are like that, but I think that probably pretty much defines my life.
Yeah. Well, we were talking the other day. We both have something in common, right? We're grandparents. And
That's
for those of you that's in the audience that's not a grandparent, that's a special thing. And we were exchanging notes about being grandparents. Why don't you let everybody know about some of that conversation we had about being a grandparent and what that feels like and means to you in your life.
So for the past 6 months, I've been the grandmother of Madeline Pamela. So I call her Maddie
Wow.
P. And she is too much. And so our daughter is, had her, and with my son-in-law Bobby, and they live in Tampa, which is a great thing. So I get to see her. I have to say, ever since she, in the past several months, I look at her and I think, oh my goodness, Maddie P, here you are during having your infancy during a pandemic. We have all these social justice issues, and truly, I
Yeah.
look at her and I'm sure you do this with your grandchild. You probably say, I hope that there's a better world out there for you and that you can be part of it. She gives me a lot of hope,
Yeah.
even though she's only 6 months. I don't want to put the weight of the world on her. One of the wonderful things about being around her,
Yeah.
is that there is no weight of the
Yeah.
world on her, because she's oblivious to all this. But somehow the next
Right.
generation's got to find some solutions to some very systemic issues we
Yes.
have.
Yes. Yes.
They
Yes.
have to, because I feel that my generation, I'm 61 years old, and while I think our generation did a lot of good, we also fell short in a lot of areas. And
Yeah.
and as you pass the baton to younger folks, you got to just hope that they can take a lot of these issues and causes further than what my peer group done.
So you've got your Maddie P. I've got my Camden Alexander. He's a little bit older than Maddie P. He's 4, but I am optimistic that they will be the change that will compel this country to finally live up to the country that it aspires to be. But we're not there yet. So with everything that's going on, let's talk about where we are today, and let's talk about the challenges that we have to face, because we've got to do our part. And hopefully Maddie P and Camden will pick it up from there. Maybe, hopefully, not that long. But let's start with diversity, equity, inclusion. I know about what the Big Brothers and Big Sisters do. It's sort of embedded into the mission of what you do. But for those that may not know, this is a perfect time to again reiterate, why is diversity, equity, inclusion important to Big Brothers and Big Sisters? But I think they would also like to know, why is it personally important to Pam?
Mm-hmm. Big Brothers Big Sisters represents America. We are in all 50 states. We are a national movement and have been since 1904. And you can't represent all the children in the United States unless you have a strong commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. 72% of the children that we mentor are children of color. One of the things, Dr. Goode, that we really focus on as an organization are childhood traumas. We know that many of the children who come to us, now your picture just went blank there. There you go. You just came back. Good. I like looking at you. It helps. It's hard to talk to a blank. That's not good. But we know that many of the children who we serve come to us with a lot of issues in their young life. I mean, I think young people generally have a lot of issues today, but we know statistically that a lot of the children that we serve have many issues that, even at a very young age, they might have a great deal of trauma. Well, systemic racism is also one of those traumas in a young person's life. And so a young person comes to us, again, the vast majority of the children that we serve are children of color. We have to find that right match. We have to link that right big to the right little. And we have to make sure that we're doing the best by that young person. It's not enough for us. We don't, this is not an organization that checks a box and says done, right? This is an organization that is taking a real interest in the needs of that specific little and their family, making sure that the little is properly matched with the big, and then that match is professionally supported by a match support specialist. There are goals for each match. And so when you're looking at building an authentic relationship and working towards progress in the life of that young person and defending the potential of that young person, you really have to understand all of the traumas of the young person, and you also have to understand what systemic barriers our society is setting up that is preventing that young person from achieving success. And to the degree that Big Brothers Big Sisters understands that and is that's an integral part of our work, that means success for the young people that we serve. Why is it important to me? I think it's always been important to me. You know, I sought public office. I guess I was young once. We were just talking about how young people are going to change the world. And I used to be one of those really young people who wanted to, you know, I entered public office and I ran for public office because I wanted to make the world a better place. I still do. But, you know, I was elected to the county commission when I was 26. And, you know, fighting for equality, fighting for just having everyone in this world be treated with respect and dignity and in an equal way has always been a very important part of my makeup and I think how I was raised. And then later in life, when I became supervisor of elections, you know, Dr. Goode, voting, we could talk, this whole thing could be about voting rights because voting rights is such an important part of our American history. But when I was supervisor of elections, I went back to school to get my master's degree in history. And what I really focused in on were the barriers facing Blacks to voting over in the latter part of the 20th century. And you know, by even just studying that one slice of American life and American history, just taking that one thing, which is voting, the fundamental right that we all have, and studying the systemic barriers that prevented Blacks from voting, that tells a story of even larger systemic issues, So, I mean, I will never forget this, and I hope I'm not talking too much, but I'll never forget this time when I was supervisor of elections, and I always like to go to schools and talk to middle schoolers and high schoolers at all ages. And I went to this one middle school, and the teacher was a Black man, and we started talking about the poll tax. And he stopped me and he said, "Can I tell my story?" And I said, "Of course you can tell your story. What is your story?" And he started telling the story about how he grew up in Alabama and his mother cleaned houses. And they had very little, but she kept a jar on the kitchen windowsill. And she would place a nickel in the jar every week. And he would say, "What is that for?" And she said, "That's to pay the poll tax so I can vote." So the jar finally got to a point, and she went down and paid the fee and received a receipt for the poll tax. So on election day, she took her son with her, the teacher. I think he was about 9 years old. And he told the story of how she walked into the polling place and everyone was white, and she handed the man behind the desk her poll tax receipt, and he looked at her and he looked at the receipt and he tore it up.
Wow.
And he just tore it up and he looked away. And he told this story and he said, "I felt my mom's hand tighten on my hand." And she didn't say a word, and she walked out. and she never, ever talked about it. And he started to cry. And I remember staying there, and the class was looking at him dumbfounded. They didn't even know what a poll tax was. They couldn't even imagine such a situation. But this was something that literally scarred this teacher for his entire life, the way that his mother had been treated. And, you know, stories of that part of our terrible history, disgraceful history in a country that has such high ideals, has always motivated me to be part of a solution. So I think it's important that all of us are part of a solution, no matter what part of that we decide to take on, right? It could be any sliver of the problem, but we should all be part of the solution.
So you know that there are people, and we're up to 500, 400 plus that are saying, no, this can't be true. A poll tax to vote, it can't be true. For those of you that don't know your history of this country, I would encourage you to go out, do a little bit of research and get some even more context for what Pam is sharing. But now, you know, and I'm sure people are saying, oh, that's ancient history. But now they're sitting there saying, here we are all these years later, and then we have the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and right here in Atlanta, Georgia, just a few days ago, Rashard Brooks. It's obvious that that story that person shared with you about voting had some impact on you. How did the impact of these murders, what impact did it have on you personally, and you know, especially considering the resulting protests and the calls for companies and organizations and agencies to take a stand against racial injustice? Can you help us understand how, you know, I mean, you had this history and you heard this story, and then you have these events. How do you reconcile those? What kind of impact did it have on
you? You know, I think like a lot of Americans, I think it's been a time of anger because you kind of want to just shake the television and say, why can't we get past this? Why does this keep happening? And it's also been an emotional time because you feel the anger and the upset and the sorrow of people who you work with. You know, all the members of our staff, Black members of our staff, others of our staff, and the people who are not Black, but feel this acutely. And so you feel their sorrow, you feel their anger, you feel that when is this going to change? You can't help but feel, Dr. Goode, that there is a pivot point with the death of George Floyd, that it triggered something. And you know, you wonder, well, exactly why. I was sharing with you before this started, I was watching last night this documentary called 1992, and it talks about the Rodney King, the Rodney King beating, and then the acquittal of the police officers and the riots that ensued. And that was 28 years ago. But here's the thing, that Rodney King beating was only an issue because a neighbor happened to capture it on video from his apartment. He happened to look out the window and see this fight going on. Well, it was a one-way fight. Rodney King wasn't fighting. The police were beating him. And he took out his camera, and the documentary shows this huge camera that he had, and he started videoing it. Otherwise, we would never have known. I do think that the ubiquitous nature of cameras that we all have and that almost every single American carries with them has changed the nature of this conversation, because the facts are right in front of us. There's always now a video for us to look at. And so that video of George Floyd's murder was so awful that every American, you cannot help but stop and say, stop, what is happening? When is change going to occur? Now, through this, I have I actually get a lot of motivation and optimism from the protests. No change has ever really occurred in our country without protests, and protests are good. When I see the
Right.
protests, the people marching, I'm like, good, you should march, absolutely, because and keep marching, because that is how we bring about change. And so I also am very heartened when I see the diversity in the marches, because when I
Right.
look out, I can see here in Tampa, we had a big march on Saturday, and I would have to say that it was probably 40% whites who were marching with blacks. And so I see a lot of diversity. I also see a lot of young people who are saying, we demand change. We are not going to accept the way American society is today. And that makes me very optimistic. They're going to be the bridge to our grandchildren,
Uh-huh.
right? The 20 somethings. I have a lot of faith in the 20 somethings,
Yeah,
whatever they're
they're not
called.
going to wait. Yeah, they're not going to. Yeah, they're not going to wait for Maddie P and Cam to. Yeah. So, so you're CEO of an organization with dedication. Again, you navigate the pursuits of this session crisis as a platform for change. You got to get tough part first. You get outside of change. How you, as a CEO, navigate this perfect storm and this the racial injustice, the social inequities, the resulting protests? How do you navigate big brothers and big sisters through that? I mean, it's tough enough in a normal environment. You've got budgets, you've got all kind of things happening, and now you have this. I can't imagine you getting much sleep. So I guess another way to put this is, what's keeping you awake at night, and then how do you navigate this organization through it?
Well, it's a great organization. I've come to have just a lot of affection for the people involved. But it's 240 leaders, Dr. Good. Okay, so picture, the national office. We're really the consensus builders, right? We facilitate, we build consensus. Yes, we lead, but you don't have top-down leadership. I'm not a not. It's not really about top-down anything. When you run and when you have a federated model, it's really about um, collecting the voice of the federation and then building consensus from that for a path forward. And people are individual leaders in their own right in their own communities, and so you can imagine it's 240 folks, and if even just 100 of them are really really assertive, wow. It's something else, right? But here's the good news. It's really, no matter who the person is, and I will say, I think I can say this truthfully about all 240, they're all good people and they all have good values and they all truly, truly care about the young people that we serve, and they want the young people to be their best selves. This has been a trying time for them. First, the pandemic. And the pandemic, of course, has affected everyone in this country, but our whole model is one-to-one mentoring. It's you become a big to a little, and then you have activities that you do with that little. Well, the pandemic, of course, has made that impossible. So I have been, first of all, very, very impressed by how our leaders and their staffs and the bigs and the boards have stepped up to do virtual connections, to help the families of littles during the economic downturn associated with the pandemic. They have been doing food drives. They go by the homes. They check on the families. They graduation time. They go by and celebrate the graduation. They make sure that they're still connected. It's been a time to really be proud of the people associated with Big Brothers Big Sisters, because they have not allowed the pandemic and the resulting economic downturn put a stop to their good work. Then you overlay that with this cry for social justice and systemic change in our country and the protests that are going on. And I mean, it's a lot for an organization that cares so deeply about social justice and cares so deeply about the families that they're serving. It's a lot. But I think that from what I know of everyone that's in this network, they're up to it. No one shrinks from a challenge. Our agency leaders have been through a lot in the past many years. They figure out ways of doing things. Many of them have had their own personal issues that they've had to deal with that I've seen, and I've watched firsthand how they tackle that, and they have emerged stronger on the other side. So I have a great deal of respect for the individual leadership around the country. And I think we are going to come through the coronavirus pandemic just fine. Not going to be easy. And I think there is going to be a shrinkage of revenue and short-term, certainly shrinkage of service. Certainly no growth in service. In terms of the social justice, I think we have an opportunity to be one of the leaders in our voice. And maybe through this process, maybe we find that stronger voice. Maybe we become a more assertive voice in speaking for the children that we serve.
Great. Hey, I know I've hit you with several questions. I can't help but think that there may be some questions from the audience. I know we were going to save some time at the end, but I'm feeling the need now to see if anyone in the audience of 420 has a question that they would like answered before we wrap up. So to our Tanya and our moderators, is there a question that you can read out loud that myself or Pam can answer?
Well, first of all, it wouldn't be a Big Brothers Big Sisters webinar if they didn't have questions. This is a group that likes to ask questions, which is always good.
So while we're waiting to get that question from Tanya and the moderators, be thinking about this one, because this will be my follow-up. You and I are both solutions oriented. We'd like to shoot, everybody knows about the problems. We can discuss the roots of it and the genesis, but at some point you have to start talking about solutions that are sustainable, results that can have lasting impact. And so I want you to be thinking about this while we wait for the question from the audience. If you were queen for a day and you could only change one thing to make things better, and I know it's a broad question, but you talked about the systemic issues. You talked about challenges ahead for Big Brothers Big Sisters. So we'll let you pick which area you want to address. But if you're going to only change one thing, and he says, I can snap my fingers and I would do X. Be thinking about that. So let me come back to Tanya. Tanya, moderators, do we have a question yet? I don't see anything in the chat.
Impossible.
Okay,
so am I queen for a day over the whole country, or am I queen for a day just over Big Brothers Big Sisters? Where's the queen? Where's the king?
Well, you're already a queen for a day over Big Brothers Big Sisters.
Not exactly a monarchy, I can assure you.
Be the president, be whoever you want, but someone that could, by executive order or whatever, could make a change. I don't want to. Yeah,
Gosh, wouldn't it be great?
Well, Pam, if you need to think about your answer, we do have a few questions from the audience if you need a couple of moments to figure out your answer there. So our first question from our audience asks, how can we create a shift of power instead of just a shift in ideology to address the systemic issues of racism and oppression in this country?
Okay, that's it. And is that for Pam or is that for me?
So the attendee didn't specifically ask for one or the other. So Dr. Goode, if you have an idea of how we can create a shift of power instead of just a shift in ideology to address the systemic issues of racism and oppression in this country.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So let me kind of set it up, and then I'll have Pam piggyback on it, because I talk about this in my book, Crisis as a Platform for Social Change. This country has always been a country of two systems, and if you're going to attack racism, you've got to attack it at the roots, because it literally came off the ship at Jamestown in 1619. For those that don't know, I would encourage you, go do your research, go do the history, and then trace the creation of the United States through the Declaration of Independence, through the Constitution, up through the Civil War, post public policy that followed, that came out of a Reconstruction, public policy that led up to the Jim Crow, public policy that came after the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Brown, and then even the country teetered on the brink of not natural disaster, but social disaster with the 2000 Bush Gore election. This is a country that has two systems, and the only way to begin to address the shift in power, or to create a single system where everyone has equal opportunities, where everyone is treated the same under the laws. You have to first understand that from the beginning there's been two systems, and until you create a singular system, not only in perception but in reality, you can't begin to deal with the systemic issues. And we're talking about redlining when it comes to housing. We're talking about the social, the inequities in healthcare, the inequities in education, which is still funded by property tax dollars. So very wealthy neighborhoods can fund very good schools. Poor neighborhoods result in poor school systems. You still have people that are in the positions that have discretionary ability over lending, over home loans. And so it goes on and on and on. But you have to dismantle a two-system country and create one system where everyone is playing by the same sets of rules, and the starting line is the same for everyone, and the finish line is the same for everyone. And so I'm going to stop there because I can keep going forever. Pam, we're both about the same age. Any thought specifically? You're looking at this through the lens of a white female. I'm looking at this as through the lens of a black male. Your thoughts?
Yeah, we, women, blacks, Hispanics are underrepresented in many seats of power. Very few governors, very few members of the Senate, statistically, very few members of the House, very few members on boards of directors of corporations, very few CEOs of publicly traded companies. So there is still a huge gap with representation of true representation of what this country looks like, where you have these various power structures. That has to change. Has it improved? Yes, but when you consider that we're in 2020 and we still have so few who are represented in those areas that I just mentioned, it really shows how far we have to go. And that's when you're going to really achieve. I mean, when you don't have a Congress that looks like America, it's hard to have policies enacted that benefit all of America. When you don't have the corporate community that looks like America at the highest ranks, it's hard to enact policies on a corporate level that help all America. So there's still a long way to go in that arena.
Yeah, and for the person that asked the question, we are not talking about the cowardly behavior of white supremacist groups or neo-Nazis or the Klan or any other domestic terrorist organization. We're not talking about behaviors. We're talking about systemic. We're talking about the fact that, and again, I use the example of schooling. And again, for the audience in general, do your research, do your homework, and look at how many school districts, how many states and independent school districts are funded by local property tax dollars. That ingrains and reinforces generation over generation of systemic racism. And so that's why you've had this ushering in of charter schools and things like that. And then look at the hurdles that are put in place over charter schools because they don't want the money flowing out of the public system. And let me be super clear that every time blacks have made progress, there has been public policies that have moved the goalposts. And so those things have to change. But again, we could always, for the person that put the question in, if we didn't get to that, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn or emails or phone, and we can follow up and continue this conversation. Tanya, can we squeeze in one more before we go back to Pam being queen for the day?
Yes, and we do have several more questions from the audience. So if we aren't able at the end of this session to get to all of the questions, we will be able to respond individually. So please continue to ask your questions and we'll be sure to try and get to as many at the end. So our next question asks, what suggestion do you have to walk the fine line and use your voice to speak out about the injustice? For example, to donors, their attitudes to law enforcement, etc.
Yeah. Good question, Pam. That's for you. They're talking about it's not enough to say you're not a racist or you're against something. You have to do something. You can't be silent. You can't turn a blind eye. You can't put your head in the sand. So that's a good question.
You know, this is where I think our country has really pivoted in just a month. Sometimes you really do need the benefit of years to understand history being made. And sometimes you see it happen right before your very eyes. And I think that walking that fine line and the idea of meeting people where they are, you know, so let's say before George Floyd's murder, you know, a reticence to perhaps address this whole issue about systemic racism and police brutality. I think the conversation has changed very rapidly in America, and I think even within our federation. Perhaps the reticence has disappeared, and if that's happened, then that's just a really good thing, because you have to start with honest conversations. And you know, it's not enough for people on a board or something to say, well, I just see it differently. It's not about it, you see it differently. This is the way it is.
Right.
You know, so you can't just say to a funder or to a board member, well, I guess you just see it differently. These are facts. And I think that what's changed is this is a factual situation that we're talking about, that blacks for since the end of slavery have been treated differently by law enforcement throughout this country. And it's really only because today we have cameras that every single person carries that we now see it. And so it's in our face, we see it, it's undeniable. And so I do think, Dr. Goode, that do you feel that way, that the conversation is changing in real time?
Well, yeah. And so I think this is what I believe, and this is what I have been sharing with those around the country. This is not a moment. We've seen incidents in the past that have been moments, whether it was the reaction to gun control and the murders that we saw, or whether we saw the reactions to the religious and Muslim ban, or even previous situations that we saw in Ferguson with Eric Gardner and other Trayvon and others. This now feels more like a movement. This feels more like the civil rights movement and Occupy Wall Street and other movements, which result in unpredictable but definitely sustainable changes. And I know that's hard for people to kind of see, but when you have the benefit of history, you can kind of sense and tell the difference between what may be a momentary reaction that's fueled by passion and anger versus a movement. I mean, and people would say, well, back that up. The Occupy Wall Street, the some of the other things we've seen was not global. This situation went global at the same time that you had a pandemic. The pandemic should have served to tamp this down, but it did not. People are out in the streets protesting at personal risk to make sure that there's change this time, sustainable change. There are statues coming down in Virginia. There are monuments and things that have celebrated oppression, that are things that have celebrated white supremacy. Those things are coming down, and not just in the United States, but globally. That's when you can tell when something is a movement. When you look across the world and you see people saying this is not right, and we're going to change it. So yes, Tanya, can we squeeze in one more? Are she there?
Yeah. Okay. Yes, we can. So what is the best way we can prepare and source our boards to be leaders in the community as we continue to forge ahead with DEI efforts and community support?
I think that's important, because we have 240 agencies with 240 boards, and those boards are the governing boards, and they are should be, at least, are the fundraising power behind an agency. And so, without our boards, we wouldn't have Big Brothers, Big Sisters. There are thousands of board members all across the country. With some board members, I think with everyone, it takes open conversation and an openness. I know even for our national office, we started with our open conversations about 2 years ago with the help of an outside consultant who has just been phenomenal for us, so that people at the national office felt that there was a safe space so that we could talk about race, and we could talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in an open and honest way. And we could develop as human beings, because all of us, we are a work in progress, and people change. They change all the time. And so I think that with every board, it has to start with an open and honest conversation. And you might have to bring in an outside facilitator for that conversation. In fact, I would recommend that, because I think it's really helpful to bring in someone skilled in that kind of dialogue. But for those board people out there who have not yet done that with the board, I think that is a very helpful exercise, an ongoing exercise, so that the dialogue between the CEO, the staff, and the board is a positive, honest dialogue that represents growth. I always am fearful of the person I meet who thinks that they're done growing and learning and changing. And I think when it comes to issues of race, and there's got to be constant growth and change and understanding, because it's complex, and because all of us experience different things and have traveled different journeys in life. And we have to be open to that process that brings about greater awareness.
Yeah. Hey, Pam, and so let me put you on the spot. I feel like I can do that since we know each other. We were talking off camera, and you said one of the things that you regret is that, that there hasn't been as much focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not as a cohesive strategy at Big Brothers and Big Sisters until maybe a couple years ago.
Right.
And so can you speak to your regret that maybe in your 6-year tenure was just became important within the last couple of years, or let's say it's been a focus the last couple of years? And then more importantly, what can Big Brothers, Big Sisters expect going forward in terms of your leadership around this issue?
Right. So, right, I've been here a little over 6 years, and as I shared with you the other day, I regret that this hasn't been a focal point for the entire 6 years, but it truly just wasn't. When I first got here, it really was about just trying to keep the national office afloat for various reasons. No need to burden any webinar with all of that past history, but suffice it to say that we had a few challenges on our hands in those early years. And then we had to rebuild the national office. And so, yeah, I would have to say that because of that process, there was a lot of wasted opportunity that had we not been going through that other process of rebuilding, solving our problems and rebuilding, that I think a lot of these conversations and we could have had greater movement on this issue. But it has, I think, really been much more of a focus for the past 2 years. And in a short amount of time, I think we've made a lot of progress. I know we've made a lot of progress internally at the national office. I think last year at our national conference in Charlotte, we had a lot of honest discussions that opened up a great deal of just debate. You don't get anywhere without debate and discussion. In my previous life, when I worked in community, you always worried about a community that was apathetic, right? If you had a neighborhood that was apathetic, it was like, uh-oh, then nothing good's going to come here. But if I went to a community meeting and people were really passionate, and this person had this idea, and this person had this idea, and I was like, okay, this community, this neighborhood is going to get a lot better because people care. And what I see going forward, and my tenure is probably just for another 6 months as CEO, but and then the next leader will take the baton, and I'm sure this will be a top priority of the next leader, is to really formalize a lot of the ideas coming from our staff and from our network into practices that everyone can utilize throughout the network. Really formalize ways to improve our mentoring, improve our training, making sure that our bigs are well trained, that our policies and that our standards of practice are not part of the problem. I mean, there's so much that we can do internally within BBBS to make sure that we are addressing real issues that are part of the systemic issues in our country. We could be doing some things, and I think we could very well be doing some things where we're contributing to the problem. And so our agencies and our collective federation is so good at analyzing things and then devising a path forward. So I think what you're going to really see in the years to come, long after me, is I think you're going to see a Big Brothers Big Sisters movement that is very much aligned with the social justice movement.
Excellent, excellent. So before we run out of time, let me get a sort of a
the queen.
Preview. No, well, we're gonna come back to that. You're not. We still stalling. We're gonna give you some more time for that.
Oh, okay.
But let me remind everyone currently in the audience a plug about a couple other diversity and inclusion events that are coming up this week. So we would hope that people will join us, later this week for a panel discussion where we're going to have 3 of your CEOs on a panel, and myself and Dr. Shirley Davis, one of the top D&I experts in the country, are going to be facilitating a discussion. And what we hope to model for the other Big Brother and Big Sister agencies out there for your board, what this sort of courageous conversation that Pam was alluding to, what that could look like for your boards. Dr. Davis and myself will be involved in a chat in Chew, which is a very, very candid exchange between herself and myself, a conversation where we're going to talk about things that people should be doing to be good allies in this movement. We're going to talk about things that companies, it's nice to put out a statement, but there are actions that companies can specifically do. We're going to be sharing that. And so we've got all these things to do if if you're interested in participating in these riveting DEI seminars, go to register at conference bbbs.org for these other the other two parts of the series. So with that, I want to be respectful of my time, but Pam, I can't let you off of the hook about this. You know, we talk about a lot of things, but we haven't really talked about a solution. And there's no one single solution. But if there's something that you think would help make things just a little bit better and move things a little further along for Maddie P and for Cam, what would you do? I know what I would do.
Is this the Queen question?
Yes, yes.
Am I an absolute monarch or is it a constitutional monarchy?
No, we're gonna make you an absolute monarch.
Oh.
That's why we're only gonna give you one.
Yeah. I would abolish poverty, because poverty is so awful for young people, and it defines them in so many ways. To have a child born into poverty means so many things. And if I could change one thing, it would be to lift the standard of living of every single American so that there was no poverty. No one went without. No one went without adequate shelter, food, health care, clothing, the basics. That this notion of this poverty that affects people really contributes to so many childhood traumas and a feeling of inadequacy that carries a person throughout their life often, and a feeling of inequity, that somehow a person with money is worth more. And there's so many problems that come from poverty that as Queen, I would eliminate it. I would make us a country with no poverty.
Got you.
Can I do that?
I'm sorry.
Can I do that?
Yeah. I don't think that anyone on this, that's participating on this webinar, or anyone else would disagree with you. It just, as you were talking, I could hear Martin Luther King's one of his speeches, in my mind, where he talked about the fact that the country had a promissory note that has yet to be paid, and he was talking specifically because that particular speech was coming as a result of the Memphis sanitation workers, and he was talking about the fact that a person could not earn a wage, a decent wage, to take care of himself and his family, and that as a result, you had people in poverty, and then you had the sanitation strike where literally people felt like they had a knee on their neck. And so poverty is the knee on the neck of so many in this country. So I can't top that. So Tanya, how we doing on time? Do we have time to squeeze in one more question, or do you want to do your last minute housekeeping?
Well, we have about 2 minutes left, and some of these questions I think may have lengthier answers. So we'll conclude today's webinar with a few reminders. If you are interested in continuing the conversation with other DEI concepts, as Dr. Shelton Goode mentioned, we do have 2 more DEI webinar sessions tomorrow. You can look on conference.bbbs.org to register for those to continue the conversation. We have several questions that we will be able to answer individually, so thank you for all of you attendees who have presented questions. We apologize we weren't able to get to all of them today, but we will reach out to you individually with answers. We want to thank Dr. Shelton Goode and our President and CEO, Pam Iorio, for this wonderful event. All of this information was absolutely a joy to behold. If you'd like to reach out to Dr. Goode individually to learn more about his consulting firm, you should be able to see your screen to see his information and be able to reach out to him individually. Again, I want to thank both of our attendees today, Pam Iorio and Dr. Shelton Goode, for this wonderful session. At this time, we will end today's webinar. Please take care, everyone,
Thanks,
and
Pam.
have a wonderful
Thank
day.
you. Good.
Thanks,
Thank you.
thanks everybody. Appreciate y'all watching. Thanks.
Bye-bye.